As we're continuing, what we did last week is we talked about preparing our home for this future that's beginning to slightly open up for us. And this week, we're going to focus on our congregations. And it's going to be a different kind of challenge. We've had one sort of challenge in front of us during this whole crisis, and now there's a new challenge that's beginning to develop around us. Let me just screen share with you a passage of scripture that I think is particularly relevant to our time here. And again, let's see here. Let me just get that all squared away and we'll be ready to roll. Here it is. This is from Luke 14, verses 31 to 33. And here Jesus says, "Or suppose a king is about to go to war against another king, won't he first sit down and consider whether he is able with 10,000 men to oppose the one coming against him with 20,000? If he is not able, he will send a delegation while the other is still a long way off and will ask for terms of peace. In the same way, those of you who do not give up everything you have cannot be my disciples." Now, the reason I bring up that passage is twofold. One is that we are called, as always, to be Jesus' disciples in this time. The second one is, are we ready to be Jesus' disciples given the situation that we find ourselves in? Are we ready to do what it takes? Do we have what we need individually and as congregations to move forward into this new post-COVID future? Now, I'm really glad to have a couple other folks. If they can go on and turn on their videos and their microphones now, that would be awesome. I'm glad to have Nick Warnes with us. Nick, glad you are here to help us talk through what it's going to look like to be disciples, what it's going to look like in terms of our congregations as we begin to transition a little bit out of this crisis. And Mike Harbert, it's good to have you as well as a part of this. Let me make sure Mike's able. I see. There you go. I'm going to make you a co-host, Mike, and then you can get on board with us as well. It's great to have both of you. So you want to just say hi to the folks out there real quick?
Hi, Nick Warnes here, Presbytery staff, Cyclical LA, with crying kids right over here. So I'll try and mute when I can, but
no problem. That's life, man.
COVID life.
Yeah, that's post-COVID-19 life. So no problem at all. Mike, welcome.
Yeah, Mike Harbert, also with the staff, helping with congregational care, and glad to be part of the conversation.
So, one of the things I thought of, guys, as I was getting ready for this just a minute ago was when I was a little kid, and this is going to date me, but I think Mike's about the same time, so it's okay. But I remember two friends and I, we'd get together and we'd do cassette recordings of a radio show. And it's sort of, it's like this post-COVID thing. It's like suddenly we have a webinar now. And on Thursdays, Mike, we have this gathering on Zoom. And this is just part of the new normal that we're in the middle of right now. So let me just show everybody what we're going to go through today, and then we can just dive right in on this stuff. So let me screen share with you one more time. And here's kind of what we're about. We're going to do three things in this time together. We're going to identify the changes that we'll be working with in the future. That is as best as possible at this point. And we'll talk about this. That's still a bit hazy, but we're going to talk about that for a while. We're going to unpack the post-COVID-19 congregation work for the Presbytery of San Fernando that Nick, Mike, and I have actually been working on together along with Cyclical PSF Strategy on behalf of the Presbytery. We want to unpack that a little bit for you if it's something that would be helpful for your congregation. And then we wanted to take a few minutes at the end just to set some of the key priorities for your congregation. Where do you see the people that you're a part of, your fellowship, moving as we move out of the situation that we're finding ourselves in? So without any further ado, let's get rolling on this thing. So let's just start with this little frame right here. What are the changes that we have seen, and what are the changes which may stick? So let me just start with Mike Harbert on this one and just ask Mike, what are you seeing our congregations doing now that they weren't doing before the crisis? What are the changes that we've seen over the past month or so?
Well, I think we're all aware that most all the congregations have gone virtual, gone digital, have found ways, either with help or on their own, to go and have worship online, either live streaming or recording or in some form, which I think we've seen that's also for a lot of churches has expanded the number of people that are connecting to worship services, both in our presbytery and around the world, literally. It's one of those phenomenons we've seen. So I think a lot of churches are aware that we need to do that. And then also finding ways to care for each other, whether it's old school phone calls. You know, some of our churches have just said, hey, we just want to reach out by phone, make sure all the people, especially the older people, get a phone call so we know how they're doing, or more sophisticated forms of online gatherings, mutual support, Bible studies, so forth, all different forms of virtual gatherings. So those are some of the things I think people have been doing.
You know, one of the things too that we've both heard about that I thought was interesting on the low tech side, or at least what has been low tech the last decade or two, and that is the deacons being re-energized by making regular phone calls in some of the churches that have less technical ability than others. And at least I've heard a couple of churches where the deacon board, it's almost like they've got a new sense of purpose in ministry, because they've got all of these folks that they need to have conversations with on a regular basis during this time of social distancing. Mm-hmm. Any other things that you've thought of that you've just seen congregations really having to deal with? I mean, Nick, feel free to chime in as well. What are some of the changes that we have seen?
Yeah, I mean, from my limited perspective, it feels like in a lot of ways, all the churches have become church plants. They've all turned into churches that are filled with needing to make adaptive decisions because they don't know what the future holds. Existing churches oftentimes have the luxury or unluxury, depending on how you think about it, about running some sort of like programmatic status quo that's been working for a long time, just keep doing the same thing over and over again with predictable results on the back end of it. Now, the ability to predict outcomes has turned every church into a church start, which I think is really exciting on some levels. We've seen our churches adapt very quickly. But like we've talked about, I do worry about more technically minded leaders now getting through the initial adrenaline rush of having to change quick and now needing to continue to adapt and do adaptive leadership long term. I hope that we do care for our pastors and elders well as they make ongoing adaptive decisions.
I was just thankful for all the electives I took in seminary on virtual and online church leadership. I'm actually just kidding. This was just so out of the box that it just wasn't kind of within the seminary curriculum as well. And I think that's one of the things, we're all on such a learning curve that I think there is some weariness, some deep tiredness that people are feeling because it's been just such a massive learning curve for our congregations.
You know, Randy, related to that, I think it's good to remember what we talked about last week, that how do we create a sustainable home base for ourselves personally and in community with those we're serving with and people we are serving.
Yeah.
For me, I've heard a lot about that in the webinars I've been on, the trainings I've been on, things I've been learning from people all over. About one of the key questions I heard from someone in Australia, and the way this person answered, you know, it was asked, what do you think is one of the most important questions for us right now as leaders in the church? And this person responded with something like, I think the number one question is we need to be asking, what is God trying to help us adjust in our own life in relation to creating foundations needed for not just this moment, but into the future. And those are the kinds of things I'm sitting with and I'm encouraging others to think about, just in terms of our own rhythms, our own practices, so that we are refreshed in the midst of not just now, but into the future.
And that, you know, one of the things I've been concerned about, just because I've seen it inside of me, is this kind of like longing to just go back to the way of life that we had before. And it's kind of like, oh, great. Maybe once this opens up, we can get back to where we were before and just kind of run everything the same way in our churches and in our lives and those kinds of things. What would either of you all say to somebody that would say that to you? Just kind of come up and say, hey, Nick, hey, Mike, I can't wait to get back to the way life was before this whole crisis. How would you respond?
I'd say there's some Bible stories about that when people were just trying to get back to the way that it was. I think of the Israelites leaving, right? And just wanting to go back home where it was safe. But while they were in slavery, while life really wasn't that great. So big picture, yeah, kind of looking at the forest, I'd say, how is that working for us previous? Bob Logan is now famous/infamous in our presbytery for reminding us that every year since our presbytery was formed, we've shrunk in size. So the question of how is that working for us, I think is a key one as we think about the opportunity to really follow the Holy Spirit into the future, to shape something that's a bit more impactful toward helping people's lives be transformed in the image of Jesus.
Yeah, good point. Good point. Let me just share this screen. This is just something I kind of came up with as I was thinking about it. And what I'm calling this is accelerated challenges. And what I mean by that is these problems were already existing in our presbytery pre-crisis. It's just that in some ways, these have been accelerated. Now I'm using some of my language. So if Nick was interviewing me, maybe he should do like definitional, like slides or something like I've done with him. But, one is just the issue of translation, which is really about, how do we live out the gospel? How do we encourage others to live out the gospel authentically in the way of life that's developing? Because what we have down really well is how to be, I think for Presbyterians, traditionally, it's been white collar, suburban folks. We knew how to live out the gospel in that way of life. We structured our church, our discipleship, and everything around that. But it's been clear for quite a while now that there's a different way of life developing, and that the way we set up the church is just misfiring. Now, this has just it's accelerated that challenge. What is it going to be like to be a church? And the other three are kind of related to that. One is adaptation, which we've bounced that word around a bit among PSF strategy, which is really figuring out how to adapt to, and it's a process of letting go of what we know and experimenting to try to find out what we don't yet know. And that's kind of a new process and a new habit for us. And again, that's been accelerated with the virtual worship, with even our virtual presbytery meeting. The third is building and deepening community, which, to me, that's one of the underlying issues related to our loss of membership and our loss of influence among younger generations, is that we haven't really understood how people develop relationships and build relationships and form community. And we've struggled with that. And then income streams, which Nick and I have talked about in a previous webinar. Any thoughts for you two? Which ones out of those four? I probably should have kept screen sharing it. Out of those four, any one of them stand out to you as more important, as something that really catches your eye?
I think they're all connected,
Okay.
but I really like the progression, Randy, the way you've set that up, because I think we have to start with number one. And I hope everyone is really spending some time personally and within our leadership groups evaluating what are the emerging rhythms of life for us as disciples of Jesus. As I mentioned the book last week on ruthlessly eliminating hurry from our life. And that's, what he's talking about, this young pastor, of realizing that this is the foundation for everything, is, are we connected to Jesus? Are we living rhythms that allow us to be well connected to that life source? Mm-hmm. And now's a great time, because we have a little more space and time to really kind of reimagine and redevelop our own way of life, personally, and our families, and within our churches. And it's a unique opportunity. I think that's the great thing about this time. It's a unique opportunity when things kind of get blown up for us to look at everything when the pieces are flying around and then ask, how do we put this back together in a way that's actually more healthy, more helpful for me in my life and us together? So I love that first one. And I hope everyone is not just saying, oh yeah, I've got that together. Because the reality is, as he says in that book, we probably don't. We go way too fast. We're way too busy. You know, we don't do rhythms well. It's so countercultural in our world, in our society. So to me, I think that is key. And then everything kind of flows out from there.
Okay, Nick, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, let's not pretend like the Presbyterians have been great at wearing a primary lens of embodying the gospel. Like we've talked about in the past, we've really spent a lot of time kind of leveraging the privileges of Christendom to grow our churches. Kind of stopped happening toward the mid-late end of the 20th century. So if we can, like Mike said, if we can reorient in this time toward actually wearing a primary lens of embodying the gospel, man, what a gift that would be, not only for our churches, but for people who God may be calling to choose to be reconciled to God.
And I mean, the rhythm of life that underlies this, that thing's changing dramatically. Mike, you just shared about visiting Whole Foods with your wife and how that, even just going to Whole Foods is an experience. It's a totally different setup now than before. Just tell them a little bit about what you were sharing on that.
Yeah, you know, Laura and I were going to get a nice dinner out on Mother's Day so we can go. The trails were open again, so we were all excited. We were going to go on a hike. So we got this food, but when we went to the food, we were just so aware of how we think differently. We now function differently because we've been in this reality for 2 months. So every time we've gone out, we've had to be aware of things like you don't put your hand on the handrail when you go in and out of the store. I mean, I always used to put my hand on the handrail, and now it's a new normal. And so I think that's the point. That's what Nick and I are talking about, is in our own lives as disciples and as servants, you know, what are those things that we need to let go of that are actually not helpful? And what are the things we need to become aware of and grab hold of going forward, just like how we go in and out of a store? It's all connected.
And you can be certain that the fact that we're seeing things in things like going to the grocery store, we're seeing challenges there and a new kind of normal there. We can be certain that that's going to have a huge impact on our congregations as well. That we're not going to be able to just suddenly start up services again and everybody's going to show up and be happy and we're good to go. That's just not going to happen, and it's going to be a while before we figure that out. Have you all seen? I saw a couple of different photographs of the new office spaces that they were trying to set up. And they had plastic walls around people and you know, and more room, and it was spread out more, but it's this totally different design of a workspace for groups of people that they said they're going to need to use at least for the next year or two in their minds, some of these companies. And again, that's going to affect our sanctuaries, right? I mean, you know, you can't just sit 6 feet apart from each other because you've still got the pew behind you that's a lot closer than 6 feet. So how do we even do that? And there's issues around singing and, you know, does singing and the, I guess, water droplets, I hate to think of singing this way, it kind of grosses me out, but anyway, if you know, is that going to pass this thing to other people? What's safe, what's not? Again, we'll be talking more about this in a couple of webinars from now. We're going to have a physician who's going to talk with us about some of these issues, but they're going to have a huge impact. So Nick, what I'm wondering is, you know, what do you see as some of the changes that we've been through over the last month and a half that you're pretty sure are going to stick, that we're going to be dealing with them for at least the next couple of years or longer?
Yeah, like Mike talked about, the tech piece, moving to digital spaces. And then we're going to be certainly looking at hybrid models once we do feel ready to get back into physical spaces together, still needing to include people. So a different kind of theology of inclusion, including people that don't feel safe yet to walk into any sort of physical church spaces. And the reality is that we're going to have to centralize some power and authority in our churches to give people access to the tools they need to be able to provide this kind of space if we're going to be the church. That one seems really important for sure moving forward.
Okay. Okay. Mike, do you have any thoughts on that? Like, what do you see as sticking for the foreseeable future?
Well, I think there's no question that we have to, the phrase that in my mind is we have to be proactive, not reactive. So it's like, okay, based on where we are now now we look forward, what are those things, as Nick's talking about, you're talking about, that we have to prepare for as we are coming out of lockdown and shelter in place? Because I think everybody's antsy, everybody's longing to get back out among their friends, among their, congregants, their communities. I hear that a lot. People are really missing and feeling stir crazy about being able to be out doing things we used to do that were very social. Mm-hmm. So I think that will happen. But I think, like Nick said, there's going to be a very slow process because some people are going to feel unsafe. And so we have to be thinking about how we are preparing to create environments that make people feel safe. And one of those realities is some people just won't. And so we have to retain the online platform for worship. We have to know that that's an ongoing reality, not just for our own people, but also for effective outreach. Because we've seen so many more people have been reached by these online platforms. And hopefully that will be an entree to them becoming part of the actual physical community down the road. So to me, it's holding both sides. What are those online things that we need to know we're going to have to continue? How are we going to do that? And then how are we going to prepare our physical spaces to make people feel safe? For example, instead of one service where everybody's kind of tight, maybe go to two services and you let everybody know, hey, we've got two services, maybe three, as a way of accommodating and making people feel comfortable coming together so people can spread out and have space initially. Just little things like that. Be thinking, how can we do that?
And undergirding all of this, Mike, is something that Randy brought up in a previous slide, is better implementing the theology of experimentation. Yeah. And a practice of experimentation. So yeah, test, right? Experiment, and then pivot or pattern based off the experiments. Again, something that new churches are really good at doing, and something that existing churches are going to have to get really good at doing in the coming years.
Well, and I was just going to say, for some of the leaders, you've also got to teach your congregation to be okay with adaptation and change. Because that is one of the struggles. I know that a lot of the pastors that are coming in and trying to help redevelop congregations is they hit these walls where people do not want to change and they don't see change as being faithful. And I think there's definitely some work to do on the theology of that, of what does it mean to actually experiment and maybe fail at something you do as a congregation. Is that okay? But that's something you're going to have to deal with. Sorry, Mike, what did you want to add?
Well, basically the same thing. I think that's one of the great things we need to take from what's happened. That what I said before about everything kind of getting blown up or put on hold is we still are there. We're still not coming. We haven't come out of that. And so now is that perfect opportunity before we actually come out physically to think creatively. And I think for a lot of churches, a lot of established churches, that is new. It's not our normal. We're used to reproducing what's worked in the past and keep doing that, hopefully better, more effectively. Well, it all stopped. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So now we actually can evaluate everything and ask, okay, what do we keep? What do we change? What do we add? And to create that spirit of adaptation and openness to the things of the Spirit that allow us to be more effective going forward. It's an amazing opportunity for us if we'll take advantage of it.
Let's think about it that way, Mike. We're talking about developing a better theology of the Holy Spirit, a better pneumatology, right? Presbyterians are famous for many things. Having a robust pneumatology is not one of them. This is a real nice opportunity for us to re-engage with the Holy Spirit right now and what the Holy Spirit might be doing in our various places and contexts. So that feels like it's really undergirding this whole conversation as well.
Yeah, and we can do that on Zoom. I mean, we can have those meetings, those conversations now before we can sort that out while we're in this current reality.
And I'd want to encourage everybody. We're there. You'll see a doodle poll coming your way where we're trying to set up a Zoom meeting or 2 or 3, depending on people's schedules, but a one-off Zoom meeting to start with of our pastors and elders, and would like to have some of these conversations. I think we need to begin talking together, because one part of that I do like about Presbyterian approach to the Holy Spirit and decision making is that we see the group as being essential to discerning what God is up to, that there isn't just one person that kind of sees it all and comes down from the mountaintop to tell everybody else, but instead we're all working together. That's why our session's structured as it is, and why a pastor has one vote and is outnumbered by the ruling elders. The idea is that together we can discern what God is up to. So I think we need to begin sharpening those skills, and it's not limited just to congregations, but the presbytery as a whole. We can gather together and really begin to talk about what is God doing in each of our lives, and I think there's something to gain from that. So make sure when you see that a doodle poll for a get together of elders of our presbytery, make sure that you respond and are a part of that, because I think that's going to be a key part of the way we move forward in the future. Well, one of the things that we wanted to also talk about, we could just talk about this part of it all day, because there's still a lot of discussion to be had in terms of what is it going to look like, this post-COVID world? What is a post-COVID congregation going to look like? But what we also wanted to do in this webinar was to encourage those of you involved in your congregations to really consider something that we're trying to do to come alongside our congregations. You don't have to do this alone. And so what we wanted to spend a little bit of time unpacking for you as well during this time is the post-COVID-19 congregation ministry. We haven't come up with a really great name for it yet. We're working on the branding, but we're out there doing it anyway. So related to the presbytery. So what I wanted to screen share with you right now, and just ask Nick to kind of walk us through, is some of the content that we're providing through, let me jump ahead. Oh, I think I pushed the wrong button. Sorry about that. There we go. To talk a little bit about, to help congregations begin to talk about what is God saying to them, how is God guiding and directing them to move out into this post-COVID-19 future. So Nick, just walk us through the things in this slide.
Yeah, so we tried to distill these 5 elements that really make sense in all of our churches. Obviously, we have a great diversity of churches and ecclesiologies and different ways that people are doing church. So we did tie these 5 together, hoping that these 5 would function like a string that do resonate with all of our churches and all of the new worshiping communities as well. So I'm just going to start in the upper left. That's missiology. I think a lot of people have been great about adapting toward things like digital worship services, and there have been more people involved in worship services. But obviously, missiology goes way beyond attracting people to worship services. And quite frankly, I haven't heard a lot of great narratives on missiology really rolling out right now. So hopefully we can learn from each other on that long term. But yeah, the church, at least from my limited understanding of it, doesn't exist for itself, but exists for others to become disciples of God as well. So,
and, just to give a couple of concrete examples on the missiology, and this connects to the theologizing too. I think economics are going to be a huge issue for a lot of our congregations for a long time. We're just seeing some of the issues coming up because of all of this economically, and it's impacting a huge number of people. So that's one area. How do we as a church help and support and strengthen people who are really struggling financially? That's just one example. But then, as Mike had mentioned as well, as far as there's going to be mental health issues and reconnecting with really re-engaging with people and with groups and with gatherings. There are going to be a lot of people that's going to be a struggle for them. So how do we as a congregation, or as congregations, how can we be sensitive to that and do ministry to people that are struggling in that way. So, that's just barely scratching the surface, I think, of all of these issues that we need to rethink, and how can we reach out in mission and ministry given all that we've been through together. So keep going, Nick. Sorry about that. Had to throw that in there.
Oh, please. And two practical examples based on what you said. One, economically, a church in my neighborhood just bought $500,000 in medical debt for people in their neighborhood. And you can buy that at 1%. So they spent $5,000 and they paid off $500,000 of medical debt for their neighbors. And then they blasted that narrative wide and far and got a bunch of love from it. So just a real practical economic solution you can really easily do. And the second one, I've heard churches holding therapists on retainer for their congregations as well. So just building off of what you said, Randy, just some practical ideas for you.
Good.
Secondly, giving space to new and existing leaders. We've had pretty thin runways for how to turn people into leaders in our places. But like my friend Johnny Ramirez Johnson says, we need to get imaginative for the offices that we create for leaders in our churches. So like right now, what does it mean to give someone the office of the tech leader? If you want, there's churches out in the Northeast, Presbyterian churches, that are ordaining elders as tech elders right now. So what do the new offices look like? This is a great opportunity to include leaders that might not always be included. Let's shift toward always being on the lookout for the next generation of leaders and spending lots of time with empowering them and equipping them. And now is a great moment to be able to do that. Any additions there, Mike, Randy?
Just the one thing I can think of is just engaging with my 21-year-old and realizing that his world, in terms of the way he thinks, acts, relates, is so different to mine. And I could either try to learn it or invite folks that are already in that space to become a part of the ministry that we're engaged in, and then learn it through working with them. And to me, that's the exciting thing about giving space to these leaders, is we can learn from them. We have stuff we can teach them, and they have a ton that they can teach us. So let's get them into the ministry. Let's work together with them and see what God does. I think it'd be really exciting.
Well, and the one thing I would add to this that's so important is those of us who right now are in the roles of authority in the churches, we are the ones that have to be the ones inviting, welcoming, asking for what you're saying, Randy, what you're saying, Nick. That is so key that we realize that's our responsibility. We have to be the ones making room, not just making room, but actually making it clear we want them to take these roles of influence. We're, like you say, we're learning from them, and we're empowering them to take leadership in areas where some of us who are older, we just don't have those skill sets. We don't have that information. So it's a great opportunity to bring new people into meaningful community and meaningful service.
Well, speaking of meaningful community, the third one here is promoting community. Thanks for that bridge, Mike. Appreciate it very much. So, certainly we've talked about ideas that people have already been doing, beyond Sunday worship stuff. People have been utilizing technology for game nights and for online concerts, for Netflix watch parties, for Bible studies, for whiskey nights, for breakfast prayer time. There's been innumerable ways that churches have been promoting community through technology. I think moving forward, I work with this church in Michigan, and they're going to be taking really serious this transition from stay at home to you can gather in groups of 10, to you can gather in groups of 25, to you can gather in groups of 50. And as the phases roll out, that's going to be key that, we certainly stay ethical, but for people who do want to be back together, that we do provide good space for people to be able to do that and be shrewd and leveraging what our culture, what our leaders are saying together as a society that we can do. So,
I do think that's that unrolling of the numbers. I think that's a critical piece. If I was the pastor of a local congregation, I'd be starting with that and saying, all right, what's it going to look like when we're to 10? What's it going to look like when we're to 25? And really get intentional with my leadership about how are we going to be the church during this phase and during this phase and this phase. And then also continuing with what we've been talking about, which is that the virtual is going to be there the whole time as well. So it's not a single approach. And, you know, the 10 to the 25 to the whatever, I mean, those don't have to be stage 1, stage 2. I mean, they can relate. How's the 10 going to work for a while? How's the 25? How's the virtual? You know, and that's where we need that innovative leadership. We need people that are going to be able to say, oh, I've got an idea. All right, let's run with that. Let's see how it goes. Let's experiment. Let's see what happens. So we just need to be nimble about it, right? Right, Nick?
Oh, Randy, thank you for that. And then nimble adaptability has really been, you know, we've been talking about this a lot, even in the last, 40 minutes we've been here. But yeah, processes of experimentation, being willing to fail. And, you know, Presbyterians, again, we talked about pneumatology and the theology of the Holy Spirit earlier, which is beautiful, that we make decisions together in community. We discern the Holy Spirit in community. That's the best side of committees, right? The worst side is that they're horribly slow and literally the opposite of nimble. So how can we maintain a posture of, which I love. That's a big reason why I became Presbyterian. How do we maintain a posture of discerning the Holy Spirit together in community while getting over the hurdle of being so slow and really accessing nimbility? Is that a word? Nimbility? I think, whatever, you get it.
Just made it up.
It's kind of like nobility. It's just a little different, though. I like that. I like that. That's good. That's good. So the idea with this big picture deal, this is one of the frames that's a part of the post-COVID-19 congregations ministry that PSF Strategy and Cyclical are working together for the sake of the presbytery to make happen. This is the kind of stuff that we make available to the congregations that really want to start getting intentional about this stuff. But the other part is that we're offering coaching and consulting as well. That we're not just kind of sending you some material and saying, hey, have a great time, but we're also saying, hey, and we have some folks that can kind of walk this through with you. So I was thinking, Mike, we've got a couple of congregations that are already on board for this work together. So could you just give us a little bit of a rundown about those two situations where it's already taking place and the coaching and consulting part of it particularly?
Yeah, for me, this is one of the things I'm really excited about that's happening among us as a presbytery, because again, I think one of the keys right now is leveraging the opportunity for connection, new connections, because we tend to isolate in silos. We tend to do our own thing off, and even coming together for a presbytery meeting, that can sometimes just seem like a waste of time or a bother. It's inconvenient. I thought our last one was wonderful because we had a great time online doing it that way. But this idea of connection, and so the three of us, have worked together to come up with a strategy. And the strategy simply is to identify, and Nick has done a lot of this, identifying some of the younger tech-savvy leaders, pastors in the new worshiping communities, as well as the existing churches in our presbytery. And then finding out among those people, who of those people would be willing to be a coach and a support to some of the other pastors in our established conventional churches that can use some help. Put that out, and we got some responses. And one of the connections that started was Lars Coburn, who is involved with the new worshiping community process, Cyclical LA. And connecting him to James Mitchell, who is just approved for ordination out at Horizon Community Church. And they're doing some new things out at Horizon Community Church. So we're all now kind of working together in this community of support. And then another one is Pastor Arlo out at Shadow Hills has asked for help. And Pastor Kyle Jochum out at Silver Lake has said, hey, I'd be glad to come alongside and work. So they've been connected. They've started to communicate, and they're going to be working in this collaborative way, mutually supportive way. And I had a wonderful conversation with Arlo about that, and she was just so appreciative. She was so grateful. And so we want everybody to know that is something we're trying to facilitate, again, to deepen our connection in our community. So we're not just doing mission in our own little silo well, but we're helping each other connect really in two ways. One is build genuine community and relationship together and partnership in our mutual support. but also so we can do effective mission and missiology together.
And that's just to name for everyone, we have developed a 23-page package that includes all sorts of materials for people to work through. So what Randy has showed us today is just a small piece of that package. But important to note, there is a centralized document that you can get from Randy or Mike or me if you would like to step into that process.
And then what we'll do is we're happy to tailor this. This isn't kind of a thing that's just hard and fast. We're happy to tailor the coaching relationship if that's useful to you, or some kind of consulting deal. Let us know. Just like I think the thing with Kyle is that he's kind of on the forefront with Silver Lake of some of the virtual stuff, if I'm right, Mike. And that's a part that Arlo was wanting to get some help with. And so a key part of their relationship is working through the whole virtual church thing. Am I right on that?
Yeah. We're just wanting to enhance that and fine tune that, related to the resource Nick's put together, which is a fabulous resource in a kind of a sequence of how you can walk through it.
Yeah. So just, get in touch with us if you want, and we will tailor this in a way that's going to work for you and your congregation. Anything else you want to say about that before? We've got a couple of questions here I wanted to run us by us before we just talk about maybe next steps, but anything else you'd like to add?
One thing, Randy, related to what we're saying now, but what you had said before about trying to create online opportunities for the pastors of our Presbyterian new worshiping communities to come together and have conversations. I just want to encourage all of you who are on this webinar to, as Randy said, look for that, be ready for that, and respond to that, because that is one of our great hopes, that we can build genuine community while we're in this time. So when we come out of this time, we have that in place, and then we can build on that. And so we can actually know what's going on in our lives, what's going on in our churches, and how we can pray for each other, how we can resource each other, how we can work collaboratively for the good of our churches, but also for the good of our shared witness in this whole region. And I think we all know, that's what Jesus prayed for, that we would be one in our diversity, celebrate our diversity, but also come together in our unity under Christ. And it gets back to being led by the Spirit, what Nick was saying. To me, see, these are some of the most exciting things about what God's making available to us. So I just encourage us, let's take advantage of it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Any other things you want to say, Nick, before we answer a few questions here? And again, I encourage you, if you're listening, to go on and put a question in the Q&A section down at the bottom of the Zoom frame, and we'll answer those questions. Nick, anything?
We did pass on the create alternate income streams on the previous slide. And if you want more about that, we did do 2 of these webinars on creating alternate income streams. So check into that. But yeah, let's get to the Q&A.
Yeah, definitely. And let me know if you want videos or PDFs related to those webinars or any of the past webinars. Also, if you pray with me, hopefully by Friday, the PSF strategy website will be up and running, and all of those videos and PDFs will be available, as well as something else that we've been working on, which you saw if you were at the Presbyterian meeting, but is worship, really professionally done worship music that you could use in a virtual service, and that we are going to make available for folks. I think, are we up to 7 or 8 hymns and songs at this point, I think. So be watching for that as well. That's going to be made available to you by email, and then also on the PSF strategy website also. So Bob Cox has asked a couple of questions. One was a bit earlier, but I think still relevant. I think this is good. Although there's one word I don't know what he means by it. But anyway, I'm going to do answer live. Can you guys see that now?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, cool. All right. So he says, so God has dropped a new SW release on us. Anybody know what SW is? That's the part I didn't know what that was. Southwest, sweet. I don't know. Anyway, old things can be jettisoned. New things need to be embraced. Music will be different, as will services, until we get past fear. So what is God calling the church to become? What is God calling me to do differently? What is the new church going to be? What is the new PSF going to be? So that's a broad question, but and we've talked about some of it, but do you guys have some things to add to that? Because I think those are very valid questions, and those are live questions that we're going to have together for the foreseeable future as we try to answer them. But thoughts?
Randy, SW stands for software.
Software release. Got it. Okay. All right. Yep. You can tell what industry I've not been a part of, since that did not even sort of come to mind. But thank you. Good. All right. Thanks, Bob.
I remember my old seminary professor, Velamati Karkinen, continuously asking us what makes the church church. And I think people are now taking that question a lot more seriously. So I think for Bob's question, it's continuing to take that question seriously. The things that we thought made the church church maybe were way off in the first place. So taking seriously what actually makes the church church, founding that obviously in the biblical narrative, in the history of what the church has been, I think it'll be really fun work for the church to be doing after COVID.
Okay. Mike, thoughts?
When I see these questions, what is God calling me to do differently? What is the new church going to be? And what is the new presbytery going to be? I think those are questions we should all, on our own and together with the people in our churches, with sessions, with staff. Right now, I think those are critical questions that now's the time to be prayerfully trying to discern what is God saying to me and to us about those questions. So Bob, those are great questions that I'm wrestling with, and I appreciate you holding those up for all of us. I'm not going to sit here and try to give you an answer for that, because I think that's something we have to discern together and sort it out.
But I think one thing we could say is, and you've been saying this a lot, Mike, but we need to kind of go back to the core. This fits Nick to the core of who we are. Let's rediscover the core of who we are, so that we can go back out again. I almost feel like, that kind of pruning metaphor. You're pruned back, and then there's new growth that comes out. So to me, the immediate question is, what is the core of Christianity? And as Nick was saying, it may not be the things that we thought it was. So this is the time to think that through, and then definitely let's work that through individually and as a presbytery. Let's work on the answers together, through adaptation, through experimentation, through really figuring this stuff out prayerfully and in conversation. And I think if we really get on the same page as a presbytery about moving in that direction, it's going to be a really exciting time. Challenging, yes, but also very exciting. So let's go with another question. This is Bob's got another one here. So are you ready for this one? The new churches and non-traditional style involves smushing people together in a warehouse or old brewery. I love that. Now the new church and the new style is going to be stymied. How does PSF help these new churches regain their momentum? So thoughts on that? Nick, I'm thinking you've probably got a lot of thoughts going through your head right now.
Yeah, I mean, that question supposes that the new churches are about the singular gathering space, which a lot of them are not. So yeah, a lot of them do smush into spaces like what Bob mentioned, but it's still probably too central on like the Sunday worship gathering. New churches are well equipped with a ecclesiology beyond, church and being a Christian is about Sunday morning. So really what we've seen in the new churches has been lots of very quick adaptations with technology. And like we've noted, like a lot of other churches, they've experienced some wonderful growth and participation when it comes to that centralized worship gathering and with building community. So they're well equipped and prepared. The ones that are struggling are the brand new ones that we just launched in the last 6 months. They didn't already have the density of people and trusted relationships. So I'm having to spend a lot of time with them, as is ours. So we have multi-tiered relationship networks, right? So all of the cyclical LA leaders have access to me and to Ken and to Bethany McKinney-Fox, our director for spiritual formation, and to therapists and to spiritual directors, to coaches and to mentors. So we're kind of wrapping around those people to support them as they have to make really difficult decisions. But yeah, churches that are 8 months old or more, they've all done really well.
And I think that highlights, one of those assumptions that we've made about what the church should look like. And that is that the central gathering on Sunday morning is the main event. And I think we need to rethink that. Why do we assume that's true? Has that always been true in the history of the church? Is that theologically really meant to be the center of the faith, or is it something else? So,
keep going.
To me, that would be a wonderful conversation, because that's something the church has been struggling with in the West for a long time. Because can you have a Saturday night worship service? I remember when that was like just kind of rebel talk. Like, what the heck? You're doing it on Saturday night? It's got to be on Sunday morning, And then it was like, well, let's have multiple, and then we're in trouble. Like, oh, now we're splitting up the congregation, all of that. So I think we definitely have some conversations that we need to have about that. But it sounds like what you're saying, Nick, is one of the things that's helped the older, as in 8 months and older, new worshiping communities, is that they understand themselves as being about more than simply that central event.
Certainly, yeah. And they've been adapting and experimenting from day one. So they're used to the same thing we're having to do now. Good.
One more question. I think we got time for one more here, and then we'll have to wrap things up here. And this is Bob again. I mean, Bob, you are the question machine, but they are great questions. So thank you for taking the time to put those in our Q&A bar. What role do you see PSF and other churches and synods lead, turning the secular civil leadership to allow more liberal openings and acceptance of worship and mission work? Just trying to work that a little bit. So is there a role that we have in terms of having the civic leadership as they unroll here's how you can get back out into society, and I guess particularly with worship and mission work? I know there's been some struggles in certain states over whether you're allowed to meet together as a worship community or not. Anyway, so any thoughts that brings up? What's the relationship of PSF and other churches and synods and secular civic leadership as we move forward?
The one thought I have about that, as I watch the news and I watch different ecclesial responses to what we're allowed to do or not allowed to do by the civic government in terms of going out and doing whatever we want to do. And we've seen, people marching on the steps of capitals and all of that, kind of saying, no, we have a right to do what we want to do. You can't lock us down this way. I think we have to remember as Christians that this is an opportunity for us to be a witness to the watching world. How are we responding to things that maybe we don't even agree with, or we feel is not right or fair? I think it's not that we're not honest. It's not that we don't find ways to express our views, but I think that's another opportunity before us right now is to be salt and light, using Jesus' words, in a way that when the world's watching, as we're responding and trying to work in partnership with civic leaders that we may not agree with politically or otherwise. I've loved services where I've heard people praying for President Trump, even for God's grace and wisdom over him and his leadership, and our civic leaders locally, even though I know some of these people praying for President Trump don't all agree with him. How can we be that kind of true representation of the love and presence of Jesus to the world in terms of how we're responding to the discomfort and the reemergence of how we are ourselves and together as Christians and out in the world? That's our witness.
I think that gets back to some of the core of Christianity, which we just need to have that conversation sometime too. But that reconciliation and Christ tearing down the walls of hostility, as it says in Ephesians, I mean, those things, we need to take those really seriously and figure out what do those look like in this day and age where there is such a wide divide politically and ideologically and I guess geographically in many ways in this country. And is our witness simply to join one side and try to help them defeat the other side? Or do we have a greater witness that we're called to? And I certainly lean toward the greater witness side of it as well. And I guess the only other thing that strikes me about the question, Bob, as well, is I think we've got a lot of work to do to figure out how our congregations are going to respond to the changes that are taking place. And it almost feels like, to me, that the best focus is to respond authentically and well in a local congregational expression, and that the civic leadership part of it, unless I've got a direct line or that kind of thing, to me, that's a secondary question. Now, that's just my personal take on it. But I think a lot of times I've seen within the Presbyterian Church that we get into political issues because things aren't going well in our congregations. And to me, let's make sure things are going well in our congregations, and that itself is a witness to the political situation that we find ourselves in. So listen, we are well past our time, and appreciate you all being here. Just Nick's got to take off for another call, but I'd like to remind you about Thursday, that on Thursday we have our roundtable discussion and prayer time, really, led by Mike Harbert. You are all welcome to be a part of that. It has a very different feel than this, but I love the rhythm of both of those in my life during this time. It works really well. And then we'll continue on with another virtual meetup next Monday. Also, if you look in the chat bar, David Frame, who's our tech guru, has just put a link that you can cut and paste that'll take you to a survey. And the reason we'd like you to do that is we're asking for, what's working and what's not, of course, but also what are some future themes that you think we need to, have conversations about, and who are some of the folks that you'd like to see us invite. I'm inviting numerous people, and we're just having to find schedules that work, but we'd love to hear from you on future topics, themes, and people that could be a part of it as well. But in the meantime, I just want to say, know that we're here. Know that the presbytery is here to walk with you and with your congregation. And so please communicate with us if there's a way that we can help you. Mike, anything you want to add as we kind of close our time together?
No, Randy, I appreciate you having me with you and Nick. And
thanks for being here. Yeah.
I just love our conversations. I love that we're trying to do this, and that gives me a lot of hope.
Awesome. Well, we're going to keep it up. Again, if you're interested in more information about the post-COVID-19 congregations ministry that PSF Strategy and Cyclical are doing on behalf of the presbytery, please let one of the three of us know. We'll get you more information. Otherwise, God bless you, and may we all have the just the inspiration of the Lord, so that we know what we need to do day to day to follow the lead of the Holy Spirit into, I think, this new future that God has for us. That is, it's going to be a good place. We just need to follow Him step by step to get there. And glad we get to all do it together. So thanks, Mike. Really appreciate it. Thanks all of you for being a part of it, and have a great rest of the day.